back to another episode of StablePod, a podcast where we host discussions with the individuals who are shaping the future of decentralized systems. I'm your host, Juan Esquivel. Today's guest is helping steward one of the most successful Appchains powering a decentralized perpetuals exchange. Josh Watts is the head of governance and strategic initiatives at the dYdX Foundation, a team on a mission to support and promote the dYdX ecosystem by enabling communities, developers, and decentralized governance. On today's episode, we dive into everything from Josh's journey and motivation to joining the foundation, the role of SubDAOs at dYdX, the unique governance culture over in the Cosmos ecosystem, and dYdX Unlimited, an exciting update coming in the dYdX protocol. Gustav, would love to hear your thoughts on the conversation.
Yeah, I think, talking with Josh gave, like a lot of, I think, really interesting insights into, like a very different model of governance compared to what we see for most DeFi protocols. We talked a little bit about how there's this incentive alignment, since it's the node operators that basically are facilitating governance on the dYdX chain. So it's this kind of Cosmos paradigm of embedded governance into the chain. They also have, for now, mostly experimenting with more internal SubDAOs, basically giving, added responsibility to people from the community. So overall, I feel like it was a very insightful conversation where we were touching upon, I think, a lot of topics that we don't normally, hear about. So yeah, it was really great to chat with Josh.
Yeah, L1 governance is always very different and unique. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see how our good friends over at Kaparki just recently, they were leading the charge with the Treasury SubDAO. So it'll be interesting to see, what they're able to accomplish in this slightly different model, I would say, as opposed to what they normally traditionally, how they help service provide across different DAOs. So yeah, dYdX has a different setup. And that's why we wanted to get Josh from the foundation on the podcast to kind of hear a different perspective and a different approach to DAO governance. So without further ado, our conversation with Josh Watts. Welcome to the podcast, Josh Watts.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Happy to have you. I think a great place to start, Josh, is with your background. Could you share your journey to joining the foundation and what drew you to this role?
Yeah, for sure. I think I'll give you a short summary. I know lots to go through today. So I started to get interested in crypto actually while I was still in school. I did kind of a joint business and law degree at the same time. So this is during the ICO era, obviously a lot of interesting questions from the legal side of things and from the business side of things. So wrote a few research papers, which got me initially interested, started kind of participating in the market and got hooked, I would say 2017, 2018. Then fast forward a few years, ended up pursuing kind of corporate law and found that it was not stimulating for me. Decided to eventually kind of abandon New York City, abandon corporate law, moved to Switzerland, and decided to jump into crypto full time.
And what specifically about the dYdX Foundation? Was that your first role in the space, or what specifically did you see and what enticed you about trying to do what you do today? Just curious to learn more there.
For sure. So I would say first, official role in the space, did some work for other projects just on a contractual basis, as well as worked for, some tinier VC funds that were looking to invest in token projects. But back when I started, it was, kind of in the heat of DeFi summer. Obviously, dYdX had just released a token in August 2021. Tons of hype around the space and around the product itself. Obviously we had built a L2 exchange leveraging kind of StarkX. So the community was super excited about kind of the future of the product, as well as I was, just in terms of kind of dYdX's potential for growth.
Yeah, totally. I'm curious, as you're in your current role as head of governance and strategic initiatives, what exactly does this role entail? I think you're starting to see more of this role and this title float around in the space. So for our listeners that are maybe curious, kind of what your day to day is, or kind of what you're focused on, what you are focused on, and what you have to do as part of the foundation. What does that exactly that entail?
Yeah, for sure. Worth noting, dYdX Foundation's we're like a tiny kind of nimble team. So fortunate enough to have kind of preserved like small, very agile kind of startup environment. I was also fortunate enough to join quite early, almost 3 years ago now. So when I joined, there was only 3 of us, and have had the privilege of getting my hands involved in kind of a number of different things, which has given me pretty good context, I would say, across kind of different parts of the ecosystem, different parts of the org. Specifically, when I think of like, we have it bucketed as the governance and strategic initiatives team. And just like, I could go on and on about everything that we do, but broad level, I would say there's kind of like 4 major banners that all of our work kind of ties into. First, and kind of most importantly, is overseeing and enabling the dYdX chain governance process. That's kind of project management associated with any of the governance proposals, enabling the community, any kind of comms associated with those governance proposals, as well as like quality assurance, coordinating with proposers, making sure that all of their ducks are in a row and there's not going to be kind of any issues to the chain. Another kind of important role that we play is kind of key relationship partners with major ecosystem players. That's, validators, token holders, governance participants, ecosystem contributors, SubDAOs, you name it. Another thing that we focus on, dYdX has been around for quite some time. The DAO has been around, or at least like one of the kind of earliest like DeFi, more like decentralized finance related DAOs. So one thing we focus on quite closely is DAO enablement, focusing on making sure the SubDAOs are kind of operating efficiently, they have all the resourcing that they need, and that they're kind of addressing community concerns. And finally, I would say one of the major focus points for us is network health and monitoring, as well as transparency.
Yeah, the reason I asked this question is it's kind of really relevant to what we do at StableLab, and I'm curious if you have like a take or like an opinion on this, because what we've seen in some of the ecosystems we participate is that some of the communities go down this path of like, okay, we want to just hire someone to kind of help lead and be a governance facilitator of sorts, and then obviously we have another path, which is maybe the way dYdX has taken, which is have the foundation and then have someone as part of a centralized team help prop this up. I'm curious if you have a take there or perspective there. Of course, there's good pros and cons for both different pathways there. So yeah, just curious to hear if you have a perspective on that.
Yeah, I think, it depends on kind of the needs of the ecosystem and of the specific project. dYdX is fully decentralized. It was definitely like a journey to get to this point. And, in the spirit of kind of progressive decentralization, I do think it was like very important to have the Swiss-based foundation to assist with kind of enabling the ecosystem and, acting as like the steward of the token as well as the steward of the ecosystem.
Yeah, totally. I want to jump into now the foundation a little bit more. In January, the foundation, raised $30 million from the DAO Treasury to continue basically its mission and stewarding and contributing to the dYdX ecosystem. I'm curious, it's been about 20 odd months since that proposal. What have been the standout lessons for you and the team, and maybe some notable achievements you want to call out?
Yeah, for sure. I think worth noting, we were super thankful that the community kind of voted in favor of the proposal. I think from our perspective, we saw ourselves as high impact contributors to, I would say like a group of, many contributors inside of the ecosystem. In terms of notable highlights, just like at the ecosystem level, I think super happy to see dYdX chain launch at the end of last year. Important for everybody to remember that the chain is not even a year old yet. So I think it goes to show that the amount of accomplishments over the last year we've been super happy with. Just in terms of like high level summary stats, to date, the chain has seen kind of 231 billion in trading volume and has paid out just shy of about 40 million USDC to dYdX chain stakers. Right now, if you look at like network stake weight, we are like a fully decentralized independent blockchain built with the Cosmos SDK. So we have our own set of validators. There's 60 validators in the active set. Would say staking levels are, very healthy. I think, stake weight distribution can always be improved. At this point in time, I think when we look at like block time as well as like the user experience at the end of the day, though, we're quite happy with the way that things are going. Also, I think notable achievements is, dYdX Foundation played a role in kind of enabling network health and monitoring. That's, things like assisting the MEV committee to make sure that any validator with elevated block time or high level of order book discrepancy is getting, consulted with just to review kind of validator configuration so they're not impacting the trading experience for dYdX chain users. Would also say other kind of notable stuff that we're proud of. We definitely weren't expecting this when the chain launched, but just in terms of like the frequency of governance proposals, dYdX chain to date has seen 167 governance proposals, which is much higher than anticipated. I remember back before the chain launched, we were looking kind of at comps in the Cosmos ecosystem, and we're kind of sitting back and thinking like, there's no way that we're going to have that many governance proposals, but just goes to show the community has been iterating extremely quickly, and we've been kind of happy with the pace of development so far. Inside of that 167, I will say, there's been 6 major software upgrades, which are introducing exciting new features for validators, for traders, for the community at large, with another kind of major upgrade coming hopefully in November or later in the fall.
So, Josh, I'm curious here because I think like before, like I think also like like before you guys launch your own Appchain, I think there was like a lot of talk about like what Appchains like could look like, right? And I think since you guys have launched, especially recently, we've seen like Uniswap coming out with, hey, we're also going to launch like an Appchain, and I think like I think we can all agree that DeFi protocols are already like quite complicated. So maybe you can talk a little bit to what is like your experience of like being part of like the governance community where you not just have to address kind of like the protocol functionality from like a DeFi side, but you also now can like bring in this like L1 level governance, because it is like 2 quite complicated topics that would require specialized people on both sides. So how do you feel like that this like impacts like the dYdX community?
Yeah, for sure. I think, super interesting question. We went from essentially like the L2 on Ethereum, and essentially had forked Aave's governance contracts. So, we had the ability for delegated voting power, which is like part of one of the first things I did when I came to the foundation was kind of spec out like what a good endorsed delegate program would look like, heavily based on what industry leaders like Maker were doing, just in terms of like trying to distribute decision making authority inside of the community. I think things changed quite a bit when we moved to our own L1, just in that governance participation in Cosmos is completely different, where any stake token holder can vote, and if they do not participate by virtue of this thing called inheritance, their validator, inherits their voting power if they don't participate. Whereas if they do vote and decide to override their validator, they can still kind of exercise their vote. But I think what we see is there is a lot more voter participation and there's a lot more engagement. I will say, like one of the first things we noticed when we migrated over was specifically like talking to validators. It did at least seem in the beginning like there was a bit of a gap between some of like the core subject matter that validators wanted to vote on, in that I think a number of validators, this gets into a broader discussion about like what the role of a validator is, and you talk to 3 different validators, you get 3 different answers. But like, I think there is definitely a difference of opinion among validators about like the subject matter that they should be participating in and voting on. Specifically, you have some validators that only really see themselves as adding value or wanting to participate in votes involving like the tech and that software upgrades, which I totally get. You also have your more activist validators, which we have a number of, who are more active on the forums. They drive decision making. They resemble kind of the V3 endorsed delegates we had over on Ethereum, where they're active stewards kind of the community, of the ecosystem. They're constantly kind of participating in the forums. They're spearheading initiatives. They're launching governance proposals. So I would say not all validators are equal. It did take a while, I think, just based on validators' experience in other networks. But I would say we've gotten to a place now where most, if not all, validators are more than willing to participate in most votes.
And just to kind of make it clear for the people listening in, can you be a delegate without being a validator right now?
So technically, it is possible by virtue of like the auth-z module, but from my understanding, and this is one of the kind of major questions that I had when I came in, was, there's obviously this gap that we have these endorsed delegates. How do we merge them over? In the Cosmos documentation, they reference this concept known as like complex delegation, which is effectively just delegating your voting power to a third-party address. So technically it is possible under auth-z, but from my understanding, having talked to a few folks on the technical side, it's not possible at scale by virtue of like the amount of burden it places on the network itself, just in the fact that it has to kind of process every auth-z transaction, every block, and do like an assessment of where the voting power sits. So it would result in potentially some negative impacts to chain performance. But that being said, I do believe it's possible right now with auth-z, though not at scale.
Okay, and do you think, like, because like, of course, I know like some delegates, they also run validators. We also one of them. We have also for a period of time been part of the active set in dYdX. But like, do you like how do you see this, like, like connotation? Do you think that this is like more like the future of like delegation, or is this like unique to set up like dYdX? Because I know like for example, like some of the other app chains like Uniswap will be launched as like an L2 where you don't have validators, right? So you're not really like in this situation. But like, how do you see like the future here? Do you feel like this is like maybe like a limiting factor that might be like excluding some people who really wanted to come in and contribute, or do you see it as like maybe like a factor where like then like the delegates you have also have like a stronger connection to the network? Like, what do you see like some of these like pros and cons? Because I think you guys are quite unique in this specific fashion, right?
For sure, yeah. I think I'll touch on there. It's a balance, right? There's both sides of it. I think on the positive side, right? I think in some other networks, you definitely see like protocol politicians developing, who, trying to think of how to word this carefully, whose value is, they generally are like very active on the forums, whether that's through like dissenting or driving certain opinions. But I don't think it's like the most productive discourse at all times. Whereas when on dYdX chain, 100% of fees are going to validators and stakers. And stakers are the ones participating in governance, whereby validators are the ones who could potentially be voting with stakers kind of overriding their voting power. So I would say just in terms of like alignment at the tech stack to the potential benefits of like stakers and ecosystem participants, like dYdX is completely different than most ecosystems in that, if you're voting on a given proposal, like you have an interest, and that interest is potentially staking rewards, right?
Yeah, and also your initial stake, because I assume that most validators have put up some portion themselves, right?
Yeah, generally, I think most of our validators have at least some amount of stake weight that they've delegated, though it's not under kind of their validator address, just because there's separation between the address that is validating, where the keys are sitting, and addresses that are kind of delegating them tokens. just for security reasons.
I think it's interesting hearing you guys speak about that last point. We're kind of touching on governance culture and like the differences in the different ecosystems. I think for us, the Stable Lab side of things, of course, we primarily operate in the Ethereum ecosystem. And so we have a different kind of culture, kind of like what we have, what we see a lot of. And then like outside looking in, because maybe we're not so active in Cosmos is kind of its own, like it's out there, you know, it's like its own world. It has its own kind of like unique properties, good or bad, or whatever side you want to be on. So I'm curious, kind of like from your perspective. I mean, it's just a different flavor, I guess. It's just a different way to approach it. You kind of touched on it with your previous response to Gustav there. But I think what you do right there in terms of like having validators participate is what you said was aligning incentives. I think that is a big issue on Ethereum, right? And that's why you have other teams like Tally trying to build like, you know, staking mechanisms and like trying to align incentives of the people that are actually participating in this governance mechanisms. And maybe you're kind of bypassing that by just doing it the way dYdX is doing it. But there's also like caveats there, right? Which is like kind of like not all validators are the same. You said that at the beginning, right?
Sure.
Like in terms of quality of participation. So just curious if you could expand a little bit more on the differences there in terms of culture and kind of like the unique properties of Cosmos governance.
Yeah, for sure. I think definitely just in terms of, you know, voter turnout, like traditionally on Ethereum, we saw, you know, sub 5% voter turnout based on like token holders, because voting is only available to folks who are staking tokens now, generally folks who are more active in the ecosystem, again, because of this like this feature called inheritance. The total amount of like stake weight that's actually participating in any given vote is generally quite a bit higher than what we saw on Ethereum, which I think is great from an engagement perspective. I will say the flip side of that is, you know, if you're not running a validator and you're not holding staked dYdX tokens for whatever reason, there is like an added hurdle or barrier for you to participate in the governance process. That being said, it is not, you know, completely exclusionary. I would like to think that we have made quite good progress, I would say, just in terms of like at the ecosystem level, by, you know, folks can come in different ways to participate, whether that's through a grant through the dYdX ecosystem program, whether that's in a service provider relationship to the Ops SubDAO. dYdX ecosystem is also in the process of forming a treasury SubDAO as well. So it'll be interesting to see how other community members kind of get involved on that side of the house.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect segue into my next section I wanted to ask, which is basically diving into dYdX now. Okay, so you mentioned these SubDAOs. Of course, we've heard that kind of term floated around in the ecosystem a bit, and dYdX is actually successfully pulling it off, right? They're actually running these experiments of like hyper-focused specialized groups. So I'm curious to hear from your perspective, you know, how have you seen these SubDAOs perform? Have they been able to achieve what they're intended to achieve? Yeah, just curious to learn more.
Yeah, for sure. You know, I'm happy to go SubDAO by SubDAO and just kind of give my take on each one. But you saw the dYdX, it used to be known as the dYdX Grants Program, recently rebranded to the dYdX Ecosystem Program. But dYdX Grants Program initially, you know, spun up, I would say 9 months after the token was launched, essentially under the mandate to fund high impact contributors to grow the protocol, to get added benefit of other folks coming in doing research for the protocol. I think the grants program was also highly successful at identifying high impact contributors that we as an ecosystem could focus on potentially converting into, you know, full-time contributors, whether that's at the DAO level or community member level. So the grants program was great for initial filtration. They are currently on their, I believe, third mandate. Earlier in 2024, they raised the equivalent of approximately 12 million from the community treasury in dYdX to fund a number of initiatives. You know, they are kind of highly specialized. The entity backing it is a Guernsey Purpose Trust, where you have kind of two prongs of the grants program, one for more strategic projects, which are generally longer term, higher kind of like funding thresholds. Some notable ones in the past were Skip Connect, which was recently voted on by the community to be integrated to kind of redefine the way that dYdX chain does Oracle pricing, switching to a market map, which is more efficient from asset listing perspective. That's just an example. Then there's also a prong for community initiatives, which is more kind of grassroots community level initiatives headed up by a separate group of individuals. So far, I would say, program's been largely successful at allocating capital to high impact contributors. I think there's always grounds to improve, but have made significant improvements based on community feedback in terms of increased transparency, trying to get more community level decision making, things of that nature. Second one I'll talk about is the Operation SubDAO. Operation SubDAO initially went through a few iterations just in terms of the composition and kind of core functionality. The most recent mandate, which recently passed, I would say a week or two ago, was to secure approximately 36 months of funding for, it was like just shy of 24 million in dYdX. In dYdX, yeah, $23.3 million in dYdX. Essentially, what the main mandate of the Operation SubDAO is to operate kind of core infrastructure for the protocol. So they are, hosting a front end for dYdX chain. They are also contracting with a service provider for the indexer, which is a kind of key component of dYdX chain. It is kind of like the read-only, where read-only information is stored and accessed for traders. Aside from that, we've seen both SubDAOs kind of increase in terms of headcount. They've gotten more efficient. Transparency's gotten better in terms of like reporting to the community. So extremely happy with, I think, the way that the SubDAO has progressed, or both SubDAOs have progressed. In terms of the most recent addition, or potential recent addition, I should say, is the dYdX Treasury SubDAO. Recently, the foundation released a blog post which essentially informally kicked off an RFP process for a dYdX Treasury SubDAO to be formed. Had a few applicants, most notably Steakhouse and Karpaki, both kind of heavily involved in the Ethereum ecosystem, I would say very professional. Karpaki ended up being successful with their proposal. So we're in the process of kind of assisting them in forming the Treasury SubDAO, as well as like taking into consideration a number of community feedback. They are currently in the process, and I believe released an update yesterday, trying to get kind of more community members involved to be directors in the SubDAO and to act as kind of signers on a multi-sig just for added oversight. But I think, just in summary, overall, I would say, 3 independent SubDAOs have been kind of incubated over the last, 3 years or so. I would say each of which has a core functional area of the ecosystem that it focuses on. At this point in time, I don't see, there's no conversations in the community that are ongoing right now about the immediate need for any other SubDAOs. But again, it really depends on like if there is a gap, if there is like a core functional component of the protocol that needs to be covered, or a core functional component of the ecosystem that is not being covered, then I think it is like a perfect space for a SubDAO to be formed.
So Josh, on that front, because like you could say that like the 3 current SubDAOs, they're like more of like what I would maybe describe as being like, internal usage of like the community, right? So it's like, running kind of like internal infrastructure, an internal grants program, and then, of course, like treasury management of like the internal treasury. We've seen, for example, like formerly Maker and now Sky, they also had a SubDAO program where it's more like, kind of like deploying, like additional like protocols or like services. Do you ever see these like SubDAOs kind of like branching out and becoming more like maybe like a customer acquisition tool, or like will it be kind of like more like, what the internally is like needed more, like, do you understand what I mean? That that like the current
I think
SubDAOs are like more working on like the internal circuit. Do you see one day that you would have SubDAOs maybe like working on scalability, like external demand, or deploying new product contents, or things of that nature?
For sure. I think time will tell, right? It depends on kind of needs at the time. Foundation recently made a number of like key hires inside of like the marketing team. Most notably, we hired Chris Grundy as our CMO. I think like, based on the prompt that you just gave me, I think previously we had thought about potentially like a growth and partnerships SubDAO and whether there was a need for that. So I think like definitely still potentially on the roadmap, though no kind of immediate need in my mind. I think, other kind of interesting areas where we could see like independent SubDAO being formed, though I don't think right now, is user support is definitely like whenever you're running like a product-based kind of DeFi protocol, user support is incredibly important. I think if you look at Osmosis, for example, in the Cosmos ecosystem, their user support team is effectively like a separate SubDAO. So this is currently just kind of being done on like a service provider basis. I don't think in like the immediate future you'll see either like a growth SubDAO or a user support SubDAO being spun up, but again, kind of time will tell. It really depends on like if the community kind of identifies that there is definitely like a gap that needs to be filled, conversation can start from there.
I just want to quickly come back to the thing you mentioned with the Treasury SubDAO, which was that the foundation put out like a blog post, basically like an RFP. I just wanted to point out that I think that's fantastic. I think that sometimes, that's where a foundation kind of shines, right? Which is like get the ball rolling. I think in some of these other ecosystems where we participate or we're like paying attention to, sometimes you need someone to get the ball moving, and sometimes that's lacking because like if everyone can do it, then no one really kind of steps in sometimes. It's kind of like chicken and egg a little bit. And so I just wanted to point out that like I thought that was fantastic that like the foundation kind of is aware of this thing that is being discussed within the community. And it's like, okay, guys, let's formally kind of like kick off this conversation and let's create an RFP process. I don't know if you have an additional comment to add there, but I think that's what we need to see more of. It's basically to get more activity and get more teams basically. I think the RFP process is something that should be emulated a lot more, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely agree with you. I think, the ideas are always kind of tossed around and they're buried inside of forum posts or Discord posts. So I think it's like a unique role that like somebody who's uniquely positioned, such as like a foundation, can really kind of add value to an ecosystem.
Totally. I want to switch over to the delegation program that the foundation has done. This is another kind of initiative that the foundation has spun up to basically, get more validators and get more participants active in dYdX governance. Could you maybe, for our listeners that maybe aren't familiar with this program, could you expand kind of like the motivation and the why it was set up the way it was set up, and basically how it's gone so far?
Yeah, for sure. Happy to. I guess like taking a number of steps back, again, because we are our own kind of L1 independent blockchain, and because we raised the equivalent of 30 million in dYdX tokens from the community treasury, meant that we had a number of dYdX tokens kind of sitting on our balance sheet. The idle dYdX tokens provide kind of added benefit in one, by staking the tokens, we increase kind of the security of the network. The quick kind of, quick math or back of the envelope calculation that we do is when you look at like TVL on dYdX chain in terms of USDC, we always think about the balance of like TVL to the dollar value of dYdX that is staked to validators, just because that is like the threshold for like malicious incentives. I think early on, especially when we were thinking through this delegation program, it was important for us to stake to validators to one, add security to the network, just because that was kind of early days of the chain. I would say now this is less of a concern, just because, I think USDC TVL is at about 173 million when I checked this morning, and total dYdX stake to the network is at about like 220 million. So we are, very safe. I think like at this moment in time with like the size of the chain and how things have evolved, it would be very difficult, if not impossible, for a malicious actor, assuming all validators are good actors, to acquire enough dYdX to like meaningfully impair the network. That was one aspect. Second aspect, potential yield generation just from staking to further our runway was an added benefit there. But I would say kind of most importantly, why from our perspective, the Foundation Delegation Program is extremely high impact is because it really enables us to reward validators who are going above and beyond in terms of their contributions to the ecosystem, and enables us to, more equitably distribute stake weight among validators. In kind of the way that the way that consensus works, it depends on validator stake weight, how often they get to propose blocks. If stake weight is concentrated in the top few validators, it means higher likelihood of only those validators kind of proposing blocks. So added benefit of increasing the stake weight and equality of the stake weight in the network is that more validators participating in the consensus process more frequently, which is better for the network. Going back to specifically the foundation kind of delegation policy, we look at a number of things such as, ecosystem contributions. A lot of validators are running testnet nodes, running relayers. These are all things that they're not asking for direct compensation for, but we thought they should be rewarded for in one way or another, just because they are providing definite benefits to the ecosystem. A few other things we look at is, governance participation. I think we talked about previously, over 150 governance proposals. The chain only iterates and makes changes because we have enough governance participants. So it's definitely something we look at as well. And then we look at, whether validators are, good ecosystem participants, whether they're participating on the forums, do they offer any other kind of value add or benefits outside of what we've already mentioned in terms of, we have a number of validators that are producing like video content or marketing content for dYdX, or partnerships with kind of other ecosystems, or potentially doing things like running a hackathon. So really, I would say it's not like a one size fits all model. But so far, I think we've been pleasantly surprised with how it's gone. I would say we are currently delegating to 30 dYdX chain validators. We publish them every quarter on our blog and do like a formal review and rebalance. Anticipate that, we'll continue to do so in the future.
Is there any aspect to everything you just described there in terms of attracting top talent, top validators? I'm curious, maybe that's not really a thing that dYdX suffers from. I don't know. I'm just curious. Does the team and their foundation, consider like, oh, we want to have like the very best of the best out there in all the ecosystems and bring them over to dYdX and have them be part of our ecosystem? I'm curious if there's any thoughts or conversations about, that aspect.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a great question. So to my knowledge, we've not gone out and done outreach since the chain launch, trying to bring over other validators, and like specifically from the foundation's perspective, like as the impartial steward kind of the protocol, we can't meaningfully change the active set. So like one of our conditions to actually delegating to a validator is they have to independently crack the active set on their own. That being said, like we have had a number of validators who reach out to us, they're interested in spinning up a node, and then we can connect them with whoever is relevant to make that process easier on their end. But just in terms of like going out, reaching out to validators and delegating them to them, no, we don't do that. Just because from our perspective, like we are focused on delegating to validators who have, at least some record of participation on dYdX chain already.
Yeah, totally. I think that's the right approach. Josh, I want to get into dYdX Unlimited next to close out the conversation. Could you explain for our listeners, maybe have never heard of it, what this is, and kind of like why is everyone so excited for this initiative?
Yeah, for sure. Happy to. So dYdX Unlimited is going to be the next software upgrade on dYdX chain, and it includes a number of really big product releases. I think probably going to change the product considerably, as well as improve the user experience considerably. Just going through, I think the main things that dYdX Trading has highlighted kind of in their blog, given that they're kind of the ones who are building the open source software. Main kind of product features are going to be permissionless market listings, which I'll get into these like in further depth once I kind of rattle them off. They're going to be releasing a Megavault, which is essentially a vault where users can come in and deposit USDC. And then the vault is essentially going to potentially deploy that capital across markets on dYdX chain. Depositors will also obviously receive a return for depositing capital. Inside of that upgrade, there is also the potential release of an affiliate program if the community decides to vote in favor of it. I think there was an AMA today, actually, as well as a forum post that has kind of been ongoing about a standard affiliate program and Kuyan Labs kind of potentially managing a VIP affiliate program. The economics we can get into a little bit later, but I think we're super excited about the growth potential of dYdX finally having an affiliate program. It was definitely something that a number of users have been requesting over the last few months, years. So happy that it finally got there. Also, inside of the upgrade is permissioned keys and then the ability for revenue sharing. So what I mean by revenue sharing is just currently at the protocol level, 100% of fees go to stakers and validators. With this software upgrade, the community, if it so decides, can direct a certain percentage of fees to a separate address that is not validators and stakers. Happy to go into further depth on any of those if any are more interesting to you guys than others.
Oh, I think they're all very interesting. I think Megavault stands out to me. I think being able to instantly seed liquidity, I think is kind of solving a very important issue there. So maybe could you expand a little bit more on the Megavault, and also there's an operator role. I was reading the post before that. Could you maybe explain what that is and kind of how you foresee that role kind of establishing itself?
Yeah, for sure. So Megavault, just kind of in its simplest form, is going to be a liquidity vault where users can come in and deposit USDC. In exchange for depositing USDC, the users are only going to ever kind of see their USDC balance when they're interacting with the front end. But in the background, there's like a calculation kind of going on in terms of determining the individual depositors' kind of proportion of the pool. And then there is this operator role, and the operator is essentially in charge of directing that USDC that is deposited in the vault to markets on dYdX chain. Megavault specifically is, I think, a super exciting use case for long tail assets, specifically where there is kind of sparse liquidity on dYdX. I think, going through the first few months of this year, the governance community has listed like close to 110 assets, which I think we have nailed. Like, the community can list an asset in a day if it wants to via an expedited proposal. With the V6 upgrade, the community collectively decided to adopt the market map, which is again skip connect. So dYdX chain can now support upwards of like 2,000 assets inside of that market map, which should have kind of pre-programmed oracles that are like ready to go inside of the market listing widget, which means they can be listed almost kind of instantly, subject to the governance process. What the Megavault enables is there's this like broader thesis which really ties into the product roadmap and product direction of dYdX of permissionless market listings and being able to trade anything. So with what the Megavault enables kind of in the background is also like feeds into this kind of permissionless markets feature is users, when they're interacting with the front end, if they want to list an asset and do not want to wait for the one-day governance process, will be able to list a market in as many clicks as it takes them to deposit USDC into the Megavault under like a certain lockup period. So the idea is that if you see an asset that you want to list and it's not listed anywhere else, you can permissionlessly list an asset instantly by depositing a certain number of USDC, which will then get kind of put into the market subvault, and then it'll get kind of algorithmically placed as orders on either side of the book, so the asset is in fact like tradable. So I think with a lot of these new markets, there's like a cold start problem where it's like one thing to list them, it's another thing for them to be like tradable and for traders to have a good experience. The Megavault is quite exciting because it solves that liquidity issue. So again, back to the operator and kind of the Megavault structure. So the Megavault is, I like to think of it as kind of like a place where USDC is kind of pooling, and then as soon as a market is launched, each market has a subvault, which has different parameters that can be tweaked, tick size, spread, different strategy for how the subvault is going to operate. And it is going to be effectively the role of this operator to decide to direct capital from the main vault to each sub-vault, depending on what market's hot, what market is going to be traded, what has been listed, what's going to be listed. So the idea is that they will be kind of charged. The dYdX community is going to need to like whitelist this address, and inside of that whitelisting process, you're going to give them the authority to direct capital from the Megavault to a subvault, and to also tweak certain parameters on the subvaults to hopefully improve the performance of the way that the subvault is trading. Anticipate they're going to be trading neutral strategies, probably similar just to like a mini AMM on each market.
I love it. All these like user features, and then there's also a couple of community features that the dYdX community can look forward to. I do want to call it the time, and I think it's a good place to wrap. Just the final two questions I have for you, Josh. What can people look forward to from the foundation over the next 6 to 12 months? Maybe like what are you focused on? Obviously, you're going to be lending your hand with the rollout of Unlimited. I'm curious, what do you have your hands full over the next 6 to 12 months with?
Yeah, for sure. I think. Most kind of important things to look out for, I would say, are the launch of the affiliate program as well. I've been doing a ton of the foundation, not myself specifically, but the foundation team more broadly has been doing a ton of work kind of trying to get people excited on the marketing side about the affiliate program. I think it's been like a major kind of gap in the dYdX product for some time now, and brings us to kind of feature parity with a number of competitors. So super excited for that. I think also on the roadmap, and what I'm personally excited for, is the Community Treasury SubDAO to get up and running. So under the Community Treasury SubDAO's mandate, they're going to be kicking off this staking program. I think with the dYdX Unlimited upgrade, there's also this potential for revenue share with the community treasury to accrue like USDC as a portion of trading fees if the community so decides. Hasn't been discussed yet, but I think it's something the community could consider. I think, from a network health perspective, what would be very interesting for me is, now that we have somebody kind of focused on treasury and on kind of community finances, is to get away from funding kind of all DAO initiatives in native token, and for the composition of the treasury to only be in one asset, that asset being dYdX or its liquid staked equivalent. So I think I'm very excited for diversification at the level of the treasury, as well as the treasury SubDAO potentially being able to do like some FP&A or funding some sort of SubDAO expenses from OpEx, and kind of offsetting the need to continually issue native token to fund kind of growth initiatives.
Yeah, I think with the Treasury SubDAO, it'll definitely like unlock a lot of potential, like what you just described. Like we'll see kind of how that plays out, and then kind of what's possible for expanding, getting that capital to work, right, and for the community, and to see what else is we can do with that. So, Gustav, any final thoughts or parting words of wisdom you want to share?
I think it's really interesting to see, I think like you guys are, what I would categorize like the first successful Appchain, right? And something that happened, quite a while ago already. And I I used dYdX upon launch, and within the first month, I had my first positions liquidated. So I've been a long-term user. But it's really great to connect to you guys, like doing so many amazing things now. And I think we can like finally at the stage now where a product like yours actually becomes like on par competitive, kind of like some of the counterparts. You just said we're not kind of like now getting to like feature parity. So yeah, I think it's really, really amazing to see how far you guys have come, and excited to see how the launch of Unlimited goes.
Yeah, for sure. I think one thing I'll say on that note is just like, this is kind of like my 2 cents on the ecosystem overall, but I feel like, it's nice that we've released, the affiliate program, this like Megavault product. I do think that like the ecosystem has the added benefit of, we've gone through a number of these like growing pains already, and now it's really just time to focus on making the product better. Like the ecosystem is already fully decentralized. We're running our own app chain, completely sovereign, 60 independent validators running software. So I would say that like a number of like hard problems have already been solved. And now excited for the next few months to just focus on improving user experience and improving the product.
Love it. Josh, selfishly, last comment, and then we could go.
Yeah.
Continue to put out great content. I think dYdX Foundation and the trading team do a good job of putting out content. I think one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on, and of course other foundations as well, is because we learn a lot from the stewards that are actively trying to make all of this work, this mess that is decentralized community building, all that good stuff. So I just wanted to say, call out, you guys do a great job, and hopefully I continue to see like some more of these kind of like lessons and stuff you guys have gone through, and kind of teach that to others. So yeah, just wanted to call that out really quickly. Thank you so much for joining us today, Josh. We'll let you go.
Perfect. Appreciate your time, guys. Thanks so much. It was fun chatting.
Thank you, Gustav.
Thank you.
We'll see everyone on the next episode of StablePod.